Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor and the philosopher. History remembers many emperors, kings, and generals, but very few of them are remembered as philosophers. Power has a way of corrupting men. Thrones often turn wisdom into vanity, armies into tyranny, and wealth into decadence. Yet, in the middle of Rome's golden age, one man carried a crown heavier than any diadem, the crown of philosophy. His name was Marcus Aurelius Antoninus Augustus, the emperor whom history would call the last of the 5 good emperors and posterity would revere as the Philosopher-King. Born in 121 AD into a noble but not royal family, Marcus's rise was shaped not by ambition but by circumstance. Adopted into the line of succession by Antoninus Pius, at the insistence of Emperor Hadrian, Marcus was destined to rule the mightiest empire on earth. Yet, even as destiny forced him into politics and war, his soul remained firmly rooted in philosophy. While other rulers sought immortality in monuments, conquests, or self-indulgent excess, Marcus sought immortality in understanding human nature and aligning himself with the natural order of the universe. His writings, preserved in the work now known as Meditations, were never intended for public eyes. They were the private notes of a man constantly examining himself, sharpening his mind, and reminding his spirit of the principles he wanted to embody. These reflections reveal not a tyrant drunk on power, but a man haunted by responsibility, by the fragility of life, and by the need to live according to reason and virtue in a world dominated by chaos. Marcus Aurelius's life presents us with a paradox. How does one govern an empire stretching across 3 continents, plagued by invasions, corruption, and disease, while at the same time trying to live as a humble student of philosophy? How does one remain human when seated on the throne of the gods? This paradox is what makes Marcus Aurelius both timeless and relevant. His philosophy was not a luxury of idle thought, it was a survival tool. He ruled during the Marcomannic Wars, faced one of the deadliest plagues in Roman history, and endured the betrayals of friends, generals, and even family. Yet through it all, he returned again and again to the Stoic teachings that reminded him. Life is short. Death comes for all. The only true possession is one's own mind. The only true wealth is virtue. Unlike many rulers, Marcus never mistook power for freedom. He knew power was a chain, and the emperor was not its master but its prisoner. He once wrote, "It is possible to be happy even in a palace." A simple line, but behind it lies the struggle of a man who bore the heaviest burdens of leadership while trying to preserve his inner freedom. In the chapters that follow, we will journey through the life of Marcus Aurelius, not merely as a Roman emperor but as a man who tried to live wisely in an unwise world. We will examine his early education, his rise to power, the wars and crises that tested him, and the private journal that outlived his empire. We will see how his Stoic beliefs shaped his actions, his leadership, and his legacy. More importantly, we will ask, what can we learn from Marcus Aurelius today? In a world driven by power, distraction, and self-interest, what does a Roman emperor from 2,000 years ago have to teach us about courage, discipline, mortality, and meaning? The answer is simple yet profound. Marcus Aurelius shows us that wisdom is not reserved for monks in caves or scholars in libraries. Wisdom is meant for the battlefield of life, for boardrooms, classrooms, family struggles, political crises, and even the quiet moments when one confronts their own mortality. Marcus Aurelius ruled the greatest empire of his time, but his real conquest was not of foreign lands, it was of himself. He remains proof that even in the seat of ultimate authority, a man can still choose humility over pride, discipline over indulgence, and philosophy over power. This is the story of the emperor who did not lose himself to the empire. The man behind the crown. Early life and education. Marcus Aurelius was born on April 26, 121 AD, in Rome, during the reign of Emperor Hadrian. He entered the world as Marcus Annius Verus, a name that reflected his family's deep roots in Roman nobility. His father, Marcus Annius Verus, the elder, came from a distinguished line of Spanish origin, while his mother, Domitia Lucilla, was an heiress of great wealth and land. Though not of imperial blood, Marcus's family belonged to Rome's elite senatorial class, granting him both privilege and responsibility from birth. His father died when Marcus was only 3 years old, leaving him in the care of his mother and grandfather. This early loss marked the first of many encounters Marcus would have with mortality, shaping a boy who would grow into a man deeply aware of life's fragility. Later in Meditations, he would write, "Don't act as if you have 10,000 years to live. Death hangs over you. While you live, while it is in your power, be good." That awareness began in his earliest years. A childhood of discipline. Unlike many children of Rome's aristocracy, Marcus was not spoiled with excessive luxury. His mother, Domitia Lucilla, was known for her piety and simplicity. She encouraged humility, generosity, and a respect for philosophy. His grandfather, Marcus Annius Verus, the elder, was a stern but loving figure who instilled discipline in the boy. Marcus would later recall with gratitude the lessons he absorbed from each of them. His natural character, even as a child, leaned toward seriousness. The historian Cassius Dio recorded that Marcus, as a young boy, preferred simplicity in clothing and food, rejecting extravagance. He was fascinated by learning, particularly philosophy, and had little interest in games or pleasures that consumed the time of his peers. This unusual maturity led people around him to believe he was destined for greatness. At the age of 12, Marcus made a decision that revealed his seriousness of spirit. He embraced the life of a philosopher. Inspired by Stoic teachers, he adopted plain clothing, slept on the floor, and disciplined himself in both body and mind. Even when urged by his mother to take better care of his health, he maintained his rigorous habits, believing that self-denial was the path to strength and wisdom. Teachers who shaped him. Rome in the 2nd century was the cultural capital of the world, and Marcus was fortunate to be taught by some of the finest minds of his era. In Meditations, he gives thanks to each of them, acknowledging the lessons they imparted. From his grandfather, he learned good character and calmness of temper. From his mother, he learned piety, generosity, and simplicity of living. From his tutors, he gained the intellectual tools of rhetoric, logic, and philosophy. Among his most influential teachers were Junius Rusticus, a Stoic philosopher who introduced Marcus to the writings of Epictetus, the former slave-turned-philosopher whose words profoundly shaped Marcus's worldview. Rusticus taught him not only to study philosophy but to live it. Marcus later wrote with gratitude that Rusticus taught him not to be led astray into sophistic showmanship, not to write on speculative subjects, not to deliver little moral sermons, not to parade oneself as a man of great discipline. Claudius Severus, a peripatetic philosopher who helped Marcus appreciate Aristotle's works and encouraged him to combine Stoicism with practical political wisdom. Herodes Atticus, a renowned Greek rhetorician who trained Marcus in oratory. Though Marcus respected him, he never sought glory in speeches as many Romans did. He valued clear, honest expression more than flamboyant rhetoric. Marcus Cornelius Fronto, perhaps the most famous orator of the time, who served as both tutor and lifelong correspondent of Marcus. Fronto pushed him to master Latin rhetoric and style. Their letters, which survive today, reveal a warm and affectionate bond, though Marcus always preferred philosophy to the games of rhetoric. Through these mentors, Marcus was steeped not only in the grandeur of Roman education, grammar, rhetoric, law, but also in the timeless wisdom of Greek philosophy. While many young noblemen used education as a stepping stone to power, Marcus saw it as a guide for the soul. Epictetus's silent influence. Of all the philosophers who shaped Marcus, Epictetus, though long dead before Marcus's birth, was the most influential. Epictetus had been born a slave, crippled by a cruel master, yet rose to become one of the greatest Stoic teachers. His core message was simple: we do not control external events, only our judgments and actions. This doctrine became Marcus's anchor throughout his life. It gave him a lens through which to endure hardship, betrayal, war, and even the crushing responsibilities of ruling the world's greatest empire. From Epictetus, Marcus learned to separate what is within one's control from what is not, a teaching he would repeat endlessly in his private meditations. The making of a philosopher-king. Even in youth, Marcus was noticed by Emperor Hadrian, who admired his intellect and seriousness. Hadrian nicknamed him Verissimus, meaning most truthful, a sign of the integrity he already displayed as a boy. This attention from Hadrian would set in motion the events that changed Marcus's destiny forever. Though he had no imperial ambitions, fate was steering him toward the purple. In 136 AD, Hadrian, aging and ill, arranged for a line of succession that would ultimately place Marcus in line for the throne. He first adopted Lucius Ionius Commodus, later Lucius Aelius, but when Aelius died prematurely, Hadrian adopted Antoninus Pius on the condition that Antoninus, in turn, adopt both Marcus and another young noble, Lucius Verus. At the age of 17, Marcus found himself heir to the Roman Empire. He had never sought it, but he accepted it with the same sense of duty that guided his entire life. Where others might have rejoiced at the prospect of unimaginable power, Marcus saw only a burden of responsibility. His true ambition remained philosophy, yet he understood the Stoic principle: one must play the role assigned by fate, no matter how difficult. His role was to be emperor. Seeds of Stoicism. By the time Marcus reached adulthood, the seeds of Stoicism were firmly planted in him. He had learned to value reason over passion, to embrace simplicity and reject luxury, to see death not as tragedy but as nature's law, to believe that the highest good is to live according to virtue. These lessons, instilled early, became the foundation of the emperor he would one day become. When he later commanded armies, judged cases of justice, or buried loved ones, it was not wealth or rhetoric that sustained him, it was philosophy. In one of his reflections, Marcus wrote, "From my tutor Rusticus, I received the idea that I was in need of correction and discipline for my character, and not to be led aside into the ambition of sophistic emulation, nor to write on speculative matters, nor to make ostentatious displays of benevolence, nor to recite little moral dissertations, nor to show myself off as one who practices much discipline, or does benevolent acts in order to be seen." This humility, born in youth, never left him. Unlike so many rulers who were corrupted by the illusions of grandeur, Marcus Aurelius never forgot he was a man first, an emperor second. Rise to power. When Marcus Annius Verus, the serious-minded boy in plain clothing, was born in 121 AD, no one could have predicted he would one day rule the Roman Empire. He was of noble blood but not royal, he belonged to the senatorial elite but was not destined for imperial power. His inclination leaned toward philosophy, not politics. Yet destiny, often indifferent to a man's personal desires, had other plans. The path that would lead Marcus to the throne began with the complex and calculated succession politics of Emperor Hadrian. Hadrian's eye on Marcus. Hadrian, who reigned from 117 to 138 AD, was a man of immense talent but also insecurity. He was a builder of walls, cities, and grand projects, a lover of Greek culture, and a restless traveler who reshaped the empire's frontiers. Yet Hadrian lacked a biological son and heir, and the question of succession haunted his later years. The emperor had always admired Marcus's family. His grandfather, the elder Marcus Annius Verus, was a trusted senator, and the boy Marcus himself caught Hadrian's attention early. He saw in the youth a seriousness, integrity, and promise that made him stand out among Rome's gilded nobility. He even gave Marcus the affectionate nickname Verissimus, the most truthful one. But Hadrian could not adopt Marcus directly. Marcus was far too young when Hadrian began arranging the imperial succession. Instead, Hadrian adopted Lucius Aelius, a senator of noble rank. In 136 AD. Aelius, however, was sickly and died only 2 years later, in 138 AD. This forced Hadrian to make another succession plan, one that would involve Marcus directly. Antoninus Pius and the double adoption. In 138 AD, Hadrian adopted Antoninus Pius, a respected senator known for his moderation and good character. But Hadrian imposed a remarkable condition: Antoninus must in turn adopt 2 young men, Marcus Annius Verus, Marcus Aurelius, and Lucius Ionius Commodus, later Lucius Verus, the son of the recently deceased Aelius. This double adoption was Hadrian's masterstroke. By securing Marcus and Lucius as heirs through Antoninus, Hadrian created a stable dynastic line while ensuring that his chosen successor, Antoninus, would enjoy legitimacy. Marcus, only 17 years old at the time, suddenly found himself adopted into the imperial family. His name changed from Marcus Annius Verus to Marcus Aurelius Aurelius Verus, linking him symbolically to Hadrian's line. With Antoninus Pius as his new adoptive father, Marcus was now heir to the Roman Empire. For Marcus, this was not a moment of triumph but of duty. He had no hunger for political glory, his true love remained philosophy. Yet Stoicism had taught him that a man does not choose his role in life, he accepts what the logos, the rational order of the universe, assigns to him. His role was now clear, to prepare for the burdens of empire. The training of an heir. Antoninus Pius was not a military conqueror or an ambitious reformer, he was a cautious, steady ruler who valued stability and peace above all else. His reign, which lasted 23 years, was relatively calm compared to the turmoil of other emperors. This gave Marcus an ideal apprenticeship. Antoninus ensured Marcus received a comprehensive education in law, governance, and administration. Marcus was trained in rhetoric, jurisprudence, and the art of dealing with senators, generals, and diplomats. He was given increasing responsibilities, from managing legal petitions to overseeing portions of the empire's administration. But Antoninus also modeled something more subtle, the art of restraint. He showed Marcus that an emperor's greatest strength often lay not in what he did, but in what he chose not to do. Antoninus's patience, moderation, and avoidance of rash decisions deeply impressed Marcus. Later, in Meditations, Marcus would write with gratitude. "From my father, Antoninus Pius, modesty and manliness. A sense of duty. A disposition to do what is right. A heart that could bear hardship. A face that looked neither harsh nor weak. A refusal to be dazzled by honors. A love of work and perseverance. Careful management of resources. Tolerance of honest criticism. Justice in ruling." Antoninus was, in many ways, the living embodiment of Stoic virtue in action. He taught Marcus that the greatest rulers are not those who seek glory through conquest but those who preserve order through wisdom and restraint. Marriage to Faustina. In 145 AD. Marcus married Faustina the Younger, the daughter of Antoninus Pius. This marriage further cemented Marcus's place in the imperial family and strengthened the line of succession. Their marriage was not without difficulties. Faustina has been maligned by later historians, accused of infidelity and cruelty, though much of this may have been exaggerated or invented by hostile writers. What is certain is that their marriage was fruitful, they had at least 13 children, though tragically, many died young, a reflection of the high child mortality rates of the era. Marcus endured these losses with stoic resilience, but they deeply affected him. In Meditations, he frequently reminded himself of life's impermanence. Do not act as if you were going to live 10,000 years. Death hangs over you. While you live, while it is in your power, be good. These words were not mere philosophy, they were the hard-earned wisdom of a father who had buried many of his children. First steps in public life. By the 140s, Marcus was already being prepared for the throne. He served as consul in 140 AD, a prestigious position that marked his entry into high politics. He served again in 145 and 161 AD. Each term allowed him to gain experience in governance, law, and the complex machinery of Roman administration. He also served as an advisor to Antoninus Pius, assisting him in judicial cases and senatorial debates. Marcus quickly earned a reputation for fairness, modesty, and a calm, rational presence. Unlike many young nobles intoxicated by power, he displayed little ambition beyond serving faithfully. Behind the scenes, Marcus continued his philosophical studies, writing notes to himself and meditating on Stoic principles. Even as he donned the robes of state, he never abandoned the robe of the philosopher. Burden of expectation. Despite his noble bearing and Stoic discipline, Marcus carried a heavy burden, the knowledge that one day, he would inherit the empire. He did not deceive himself about what this meant. He knew emperors lived under constant threat of betrayal, assassination, and slander. He knew power corrupted even the best of men. He knew the empire was too vast, too chaotic, too unstable for any single man to rule perfectly. And yet, he also knew he could not refuse. Stoicism taught him to embrace his fate, not resist it. If fate had placed the crown upon his head, then it was his duty to wear it, not for himself, but for Rome. In one of his meditations, written years later as emperor, Marcus would remind himself, "When you wake in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. They are like this because they cannot tell good from evil. But I have seen the beauty of good, and the ugliness of evil, and I recognize that the wrongdoer has a nature related to my own. We are made for cooperation." These words reflect the mindset of a man who knew the burdens of leadership would be heavy, and yet resolved to carry them with patience, humility, and virtue. The calm before the storm. For more than 2 decades, Marcus lived under the shadow of Antoninus Pius, waiting patiently for the moment when he would take the throne. During this time, he matured from a serious youth into a seasoned statesman, philosopher, and family man. He learned the workings of empire, the responsibilities of power, and the art of ruling justly. But nothing could fully prepare him for what was to come. In 161 AD, Antoninus Pius died, and Marcus Aurelius, reluctant, philosophical, humble, became the ruler of the Roman Empire. He did not ascend alone. Honoring the condition of Hadrian's succession, Marcus invited his adoptive brother, Lucius Verus, to rule as co-emperor. It was a unique experiment in Roman history, 2 emperors sharing power, though in truth Marcus carried the greater weight of responsibility. What followed was no golden age of peace. Instead, Marcus's reign was marked by relentless war, plague, and personal tragedy. Fate had not given him an easy role. Yet it was precisely in the crucible of these trials that Marcus Aurelius, the Philosopher-King, revealed his true greatness. Character formation. By the time Marcus Aurelius stood on the threshold of power, his character was already fully formed. He had been born into privilege, trained by the greatest minds of Rome, and adopted into the line of succession by one of history's most stable emperors. Yet unlike many of his peers, he never became intoxicated by wealth or corrupted by luxury. The Marcus Aurelius who would later command legions and rule an empire was shaped less by the glittering halls of Rome than by the quiet discipline of philosophy. A mind drawn to philosophy. From an early age, Marcus was drawn not to games, extravagance, or the social pleasures of Rome's elite, but to study and reflection. His contemporaries noted that he preferred simplicity over excess. He wore plain clothing, ate simple meals, and spent long hours in study. This inclination was not born of poverty, his family was wealthy, but of a natural temperament inclined toward austerity and thought. When most boys his age were training for public speaking competitions or indulging in the entertainments of Roman youth, Marcus was practicing self-control. He read philosophy not as an intellectual exercise, but as a manual for living. By the age of 12, he had embraced the Stoic lifestyle with almost fanatical devotion. He even slept on the floor, rejecting comfort, until his mother persuaded him to use a mattress for his health. His seriousness might have made him seem aloof, but it was also what earned him respect. Even Emperor Hadrian noticed this quality, calling him verissimus, most truthful. For Marcus, philosophy was never a subject to debate in salons or display in speeches. It was a way of being. The influence of teachers and mentors. Marcus never forgot the impact of his teachers. In Meditations, he listed, one by one, the qualities he had learned from each. These reflections reveal not only his humility but also the mosaic of influences that shaped his character. From his grandfather Verus, dignity, calmness, and generosity of spirit. From his mother, piety, humility, and disregard for excess wealth. From his tutors, patience, self-control, and intellectual rigor. From Rusticus, the commitment to live philosophy, not just study it. From Fronto, the beauty of language and the dangers of vanity. These influences created a young man who was both deeply disciplined and quietly compassionate. Unlike many noblemen, Marcus did not use education to boast of his intellect or climb the social ladder. Instead, he absorbed what he learned as guidelines for how to live. He once wrote, "From Rusticus I learned the idea that I was in need of correction and discipline for my character. Not to be led astray into ambition or ostentation. Not to parade myself as a man of great discipline." This statement reveals the core of Marcus's personality. He was constantly vigilant against pride. The Stoic seed. The philosophy that most defined Marcus was Stoicism. Unlike abstract or speculative schools, Stoicism was practical. It taught that life is short, that events are beyond our control, and that virtue, wisdom, courage, justice, temperance, is the only true good. The central Stoic lesson is this: we cannot control what happens to us, but we can control how we respond. For Marcus, this became a lifelong creed. Whether facing betrayal, war, disease, or death, he reminded himself that the external world was beyond his command, but his mind was his fortress. Even before becoming emperor, Marcus trained himself to separate what was essential from what was trivial. Glory, wealth, and reputation were fleeting. What mattered was the integrity of one's soul. He wrote later, "The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts." That conviction was forged in his youth, long before he ever sat on the throne. A reluctant heir. When Hadrian arranged for Marcus's adoption into the imperial line, Marcus did not greet the news with celebration. He was not ambitious in the conventional sense. Where other men sought power, Marcus sought peace of mind. The thought of becoming emperor filled him less with pride than with unease. He accepted his role because Stoicism demanded acceptance of fate. He did not choose to be heir to the empire. Fate had chosen it for him. His duty was not to flee from responsibility but to bear it with dignity. This reluctant approach to power became one of Marcus's defining traits. Unlike emperors such as Nero or Caligula, who reveled in spectacle, Marcus approached leadership as a solemn burden. Later, when he reflected on his life, he often reminded himself of the impermanence of fame and the futility of ambition. In his eyes, an emperor and a beggar shared the same destiny, death. Strengths of character. The Marcus who emerged from youth into adulthood possessed a unique combination of traits rarely found in rulers. Humility. Despite his noble rank and adoption into the imperial family, he remained modest, shunning extravagance and arrogance. Discipline. He practiced daily self-examination, holding himself accountable for his thoughts and actions. Compassion. Though often reserved, he displayed empathy and patience with others, qualities that would later guide his governance. Intellectual depth. He saw philosophy not as theory but as a survival tool, essential for navigating both personal trials and public duty. Resilience. Early encounters with loss, his father's death, the deaths of siblings and later children, steeled him to endure suffering without despair. These traits distinguished him from many of his contemporaries. Where others were seduced by luxury, Marcus found meaning in simplicity. Where others sought to dominate, Marcus sought to understand. The inner battle. But Marcus was not without struggles. His own writings reveal a man constantly battling inner demons, pride, anger, anxiety, and despair. His greatness lay not in being free from these flaws but in continually resisting them. In Meditations, we see his inner dialogue, reminding himself daily of how he wished to live. To be patient with difficult people. To control anger. To remain humble despite being emperor. To accept death calmly. This self-examination was a kind of spiritual training. Just as soldiers train their bodies for war, Marcus trained his mind for the battles of life. His constant reminders to himself show that he never assumed mastery, he was always in the process of becoming. The philosopher in waiting. By the time Antoninus Pius's long reign drew to a close, Marcus was no longer the austere boy who had slept on the floor to harden himself. He was a seasoned man, father of many children, husband, senator, consul, and philosopher. He had spent decades preparing for leadership, not through ambition but through self-mastery. His formation was complete, a ruler forged not by conquest, but by reflection, not by indulgence, but by discipline, not by thirst for glory, but by a love of wisdom. When Antoninus died in 161 AD, Marcus Aurelius inherited the throne of Rome. He did not seize it eagerly, he accepted it solemnly. His reign would not be a time of peace and leisure, but of war, plague, and ceaseless trials. And yet, everything he had cultivated in his character, his humility, his discipline, his Stoic philosophy, prepared him for the storm ahead. He was now both emperor and philosopher. The world would test whether the two could coexist. Under the shadow of Antoninus Pius. When Marcus Aurelius was adopted by Antoninus Pius in 138 AD, he inherited not only the promise of emperorship but also a heavy burden of expectation. For nearly 2 decades, he lived under the shadow of Antoninus, a man whose reputation for prudence, moderation, and administrative skill set a standard few could meet. Marcus was not a ruler yet. He was an heir. But in the Roman world, an heir was never idle. The empire stretched across continents, and every aspect of governance, from tax collection in Syria to frontier defense along the Danube, could determine Rome's survival. For Marcus, this meant his daily life was consumed by lessons in law, philosophy, military logistics, and the delicate art of political restraint. The patience of an heir. Unlike many imperial heirs who schemed for power, Marcus was almost reluctant about the throne. He never sought glory for its own sake, and this temperament made him uniquely suited to learn without demanding. Antoninus Pius, for his part, ruled with remarkable stability. His reign was free of major wars, and he maintained Rome's prosperity through diplomacy, infrastructure, and careful stewardship of finances. This relative peace allowed Marcus to grow in wisdom rather than be hardened too early by bloodshed. But this long waiting period tested Marcus in other ways. For 23 years, he lived as a perpetual apprentice, praised, honored, but never in control. Lesser men would have grown bitter. Marcus grew disciplined. His writings and meditations later reveal how deeply he valued patience. No man is more unhappy than he who never faces adversity. For he is not permitted to prove himself. The work of governance. During these years, Marcus learned the machinery of empire. Senate duties, he attended debates, listened more than he spoke, and absorbed the subtleties of Roman law and politics. He gained a reputation for fairness, never indulging in personal attacks or partisan vendettas. Judicial responsibilities, Antoninus gradually entrusted Marcus with legal cases. Roman citizens and provinces could appeal to the emperor, and Marcus was often tasked with hearing petitions. His rulings emphasized equity, compassion, and reason over rigid punishment. Administrative oversight. He reviewed reports from governors across the empire, studied tax policies, and oversaw infrastructure projects. In this, Marcus sharpened his ability to balance ideals with practical necessity. What emerges from this period is not a man of sudden genius, but of deliberate cultivation. Marcus Aurelius was being shaped by the day-to-day grind of governance, the very tasks that required discipline, humility, and perseverance. The philosophical life in a political world. Even as he was immersed in politics, Marcus never abandoned philosophy. He continued correspondence with tutors like Herod's Atticus and maintained friendships with Stoic thinkers who reinforced his inner grounding. What is striking is that Marcus did not treat philosophy as an escape from politics. He treated it as armor against corruption. In a world where power seduced and wealth intoxicated, Marcus's devotion to Stoic discipline reminded him of impermanence. He often noted that the marble monuments emperors built would one day crumble. That senators who flattered today would slander tomorrow. That even emperors were mortal, bound by the same laws of nature. In this way, Marcus prepared himself not just to rule others, but to rule himself. Family life amid responsibility. Marcus's personal life during this period was equally complex. His marriage to Faustina the Younger, daughter of Antoninus, deepened the bond between the ruling families but also added personal pressures. Faustina bore him many children, 13 in total, though many would die young. These repeated losses reinforced Marcus's Stoic acceptance of mortality. Parenthood gave him joy but also sharpened his meditations on impermanence. In his writings, he never rails against fate for taking his children. Instead, he reflects on the natural order, that death is not an injustice but a return to the cycle of the universe. Few rulers faced grief with such equanimity. The looming responsibility. By the mid-150s AD, Marcus was no longer merely a promising heir. He was the obvious successor. The Senate respected him, the army acknowledged him, and Antoninus leaned on him more heavily in state matters. But the very stability of Antoninus's reign delayed Marcus's own. The longer Antoninus lived, the longer Marcus waited. Some accounts suggest Marcus suffered from ill health during this time, stomach troubles, headaches, fatigue. Whether from stress, heredity, or the sheer weight of expectation, these ailments foreshadowed the fragile body that would later bear the empire's greatest burdens. In Meditations, Marcus would later write, "You may leave this life at any moment. Let that determine what you do, say, and think." Even as a young man, he lived with the awareness that time was short and destiny was heavy. The turning of the tide. Antoninus Pius ruled until 161 AD, a remarkable 23-year reign. When he finally died, Marcus was nearly 40 years old, mature in experience but weary from long preparation. The moment had come. The philosopher who never lusted for the throne now had to bear it. But he would not bear it alone. Out of loyalty to his adoptive brother Lucius Verus, co-adopted by Antoninus, Marcus insisted they rule as joint emperors. It was an unprecedented move in Roman history, and it revealed Marcus's humility. He did not grasp at sole power. Rome would soon test that decision. For no sooner had Marcus donned the purple than the empire was thrown into crisis, wars, plagues, and betrayals that would consume the rest of his life. But before those storms, Marcus Aurelius had endured decades of apprenticeship. It was this long, patient preparation that gave him the inner strength to meet history's chaos with composure. Rise to power, the making of an emperor. The destiny of Marcus Aurelius was not one he chose for himself, but one chosen for him by others. Philosophy might have been his calling, but politics was his fate. To understand Marcus as both emperor and philosopher, we must look at how a quiet, bookish young man, more comfortable with scrolls than with swords, was gradually molded into the ruler of the Roman world. Hadrian's vision and the chain of adoption. The turning point in Marcus's life came not from his own ambition but from Emperor Hadrian's foresight. In the 2nd century AD, succession in Rome was a delicate matter. Unlike monarchies with bloodline inheritance, Rome had no fixed system for choosing emperors. While dynasties existed, the empire often relied on adoption, a political tool that allowed emperors to handpick heirs based on ability and trust rather than birth alone. Hadrian, nearing the end of his reign, looked at Marcus and saw something rare, a boy with discipline, intellect, and moral character. But Marcus was far too young to inherit such power. Instead, Hadrian adopted a man named Antoninus Pius, a mature senator, on the condition that Antoninus would in turn adopt Marcus and another promising youth, Lucius Verus. It was a chain of succession designed to secure stability for decades to come. Thus, Marcus was set on a path he had not asked for, but which he would embrace with duty. At only 17 years old, he found himself heir to an empire, though the transition would be gradual. The reign of Antoninus Pius, a model of steady leadership. When Hadrian died in 138 AD, Antoninus Pius became emperor. His reign would last 23 years and be remembered as one of the most peaceful and prosperous in Roman history. Unlike many emperors, Antoninus was not a conqueror or a tyrant. He was a cautious, steady ruler, focused on maintaining stability and upholding the empire's laws and traditions. For Marcus, Antoninus became not only a political guardian but also a moral example. The older man treated Marcus like a son, involving him in government affairs, teaching him the rhythms of imperial duty, and preparing him for the burdens of power. Marcus later praised Antoninus in Meditations as a model of patience, dignity, and self-control. From him, Marcus learned that ruling Rome was less about dazzling the world with glory and more about quietly carrying responsibility with balance and restraint. Antoninus also gave Marcus a lesson in discipline of power. Despite holding absolute authority, Antoninus lived simply, avoided cruelty, and ruled by law rather than impulse. This model deeply influenced Marcus's own vision of kingship. The reluctant heir. Despite being groomed for power, Marcus never sought it eagerly. His temperament was contemplative, and his natural inclination was toward philosophy, not politics. He once confessed in his writings that he longed for a simpler life, a life of study and quiet reflection. Yet, he also knew that duty was not about what one preferred but about what one was called to bear. This tension, between the philosopher who sought inner peace and the emperor who was burdened with endless responsibility, defined Marcus's entire life. His greatness lies not in his love of power, but in his unwillingness to abuse it. He accepted leadership not as a privilege, but as a heavy responsibility entrusted to him by fate and circumstance. Marriage and family life. To solidify his place in the imperial family, Marcus married Faustina the Younger, daughter of Antoninus Pius. In 145 AD. Faustina was intelligent, politically savvy, and known for her beauty. Their marriage produced at least 13 children, though, tragically, many died young. Only a few survived into adulthood, including Commodus, who would one day succeed Marcus as emperor. For Marcus, family life was both a source of joy and grief. The deaths of his children reminded him constantly of the fragility of human existence, a theme that recurs often in his writings. His love for Faustina was genuine, but their relationship was not without difficulties, as rumors of her infidelities circulated in Rome. Marcus, however, chose not to let such whispers dominate his judgment, practicing the Stoic principle of focusing only on what lay within his control. Preparing for the throne. Throughout the 140s and 150s AD, Marcus gradually took on more governmental responsibilities. He held consulships, advised Antoninus on matters of state, and began sitting in the imperial courts to hear petitions and legal cases. Step by step, the philosopher was being transformed into a statesman. Yet, Marcus never abandoned his intellectual pursuits. Even as he entered public life, he continued to write, study, and reflect. His education had not been for vanity, it was preparation for the very real challenges of leadership. For Marcus, philosophy was not an escape from politics but a tool to endure it. Stoicism became the armor that protected him from the temptations of power and the bitterness of constant responsibility. The burden of fate. When Antoninus Pius died in 161 AD, Marcus Aurelius ascended the throne. True to Hadrian's plan, he did not rule alone. He insisted on sharing power with his adoptive brother Lucius Verus, a gesture that revealed both his humility and his sense of fairness. Rome thus entered a rare experiment in joint rule, with two emperors sitting on the throne. Marcus was now emperor of Rome, not by ambition but by duty. He had inherited not only the authority of the world's greatest empire but also the heavy burdens of its defense, its administration, and its survival. Ahead lay wars, plagues, and trials that would test every ounce of his strength. The quiet student of philosophy had become the ruler of the known world. But in his heart, Marcus remained the same man he had always been, not a conqueror, but a thinker, not a tyrant, but a servant of duty, striving to live with wisdom in a position where wisdom was often swallowed by pride.